Right now, somewhere on this planet, someone is exhaling a thin gray ribbon into the air and watching it disappear. They think they're doing something modern. A habit. A vice. Maybe a mistake they're trying to quit. They have no idea they're performing one of the oldest rituals our species has ever known. Not old like a few centuries. Old like before language. Old like before we were even the species doing it. Here's a question worth sitting with. What if the urge to breathe in smoke isn't a bad habit humans picked up? What if it's a survival instinct we never actually lost? Hold that thought, because the answer starts somewhere you wouldn't expect. Quick one before we go there. If unraveling mysteries like this is your thing, hit subscribe now. You're going to want to be here for the rest of this one. The tax. Not a philosophy. Not a statistic. A body, crouched low, eyes half shut against the sting of the air. 200,000 years ago, give or take. The fire is small, deliberately small, because fuel is precious and the dark past the circle isn't a metaphor. It has teeth in it. The smoke doesn't rise politely. It curls. It hangs. It finds every face at that fire and settles into every set of lungs. There is no version of prehistoric fire that doesn't come bundled with prehistoric smoke inhalation. If you wanted warmth, if you wanted cooked meat, if you wanted a wall between you and whatever hunts at night, you paid a tax. The tax was smoke, in your chest, every evening, for your entire life. Most people assume that's just a side effect. Background noise in the bigger story of human progress. That assumption is where this story starts to fall apart. Because not everything humans were burning was just wood. The lock that was already there. Forests aren't neutral. They're chemical factories. Certain leaves, certain resins, certain seeds, hit them with open flame and they don't just release heat and ash. They release compounds that were never built for combustion. Compounds that, once airborne, go looking for a very specific kind of lock to fit into. Here's the part that should stop you. The human brain had been manufacturing that lock since before we were human. Every mammal nervous system on Earth is threaded with receptor sites that respond to plant-derived compounds. Not because evolution somehow anticipated a circle of hominids inhaling forbidden smoke, but because those same receptors were already busy with quieter, older jobs. Mood, appetite, memory, stress. Evolution wasn't building a getting high mechanism. It was solving completely different problems, decades, generations, before smoke ever entered the picture. It didn't care what would eventually walk through that door. It only cared that the lock worked. Which means the first time an ancestor of ours breathed in smoke laced with the right compound, nothing had to be invented. Nothing had to be discovered in any lab. A key found a lock machine millennia earlier for an entirely different purpose, and the door swung open anyway. Sit with that for a second. Ritual, medicine, addiction, culture, a trillion-dollar industry. All of it may trace back to something nobody planned. Somebody sat downwind of the wrong plant on an ordinary night, and their evening got extraordinarily good, and they had no framework whatsoever for understanding why. That's not the beginning of a habit. That's the beginning of a mystery nobody knew they'd started. The silence that isn't what it looks like. Here's where the story should get easier. It doesn't. If early humans were getting accidentally altered by campfire smoke for hundreds of thousands of years, there should be mountains of proof. Chart seeds. Ritual tools. Some unmistakable fingerprint left in the dirt. There isn't. Not from that deep in time. And the reason why says less about what didn't happen, and more about what simply couldn't survive to be found. Stone endures. A hand axe can sit in sediment for 3 million years and come up out of the ground looking almost the same day it was dropped. A handful of dried leaves in a pouch gets no such mercy. Plant matter rots, dissolves, gets eaten, gets pulled back into the earth within a few human lifetimes. The tools of altered consciousness are made, almost without exception, from the exact materials nature is built to erase. So the silence in the archaeological record isn't a verdict. It's a blind spot. And blind spots are where the most interesting arguments live. The witness who was telling the truth. High in a Central Asian mountain range, a tomb, roughly 2,500 years old. Wooden containers. Stones heated white hot. Residue from a cannabis strain far more potent than anything growing wild nearby. Someone selected this plant. Someone cultivated it. Someone placed it in a grave, meaning to carry it, or its effects, into whatever came next. For a long time, that tomb was treated as an outlier. strange footnote from a strange culture. Then people went back and read an old Greek writer more carefully. He described nomadic horsemen from the steppe sealing themselves into small tents, throwing seeds onto glowing stones, and, in his words, howling with a pleasure that startled him. For centuries, historians assumed he'd exaggerated, embellished. Ancient writers did that. Everybody knew it. Then archaeologists finally dug into the burial mounds of that same culture. They found exactly what he described. The bronze braziers. The heat-fractured stones. The residue, still there, still legible after 2,500 years. He hadn't invented a story. He'd underreported one. Which leaves an uncomfortable question hanging in the air. How many other ancient witnesses did we quietly write off as unreliable? Simply because nobody had dug in the right place yet. The continent that had no way of knowing. Now follow the smoke somewhere else entirely. Because the story splits here and gets stranger. There's a plant that, before 1492, no European, no African, no Asian civilization had ever laid eyes on. It grew only in the Americas, cultivated for thousands of years by people who treated it less like a habit and more like sacred technology. When ships from the old world finally reached the new one, the earliest written accounts describe bewildered sailors watching locals inhale glowing smoke and release it slowly through nose and mouth, as if breathing itself had become a performance. Within weeks, the sailors were doing it too. Of course they were. Some doors, once you've watched someone else walk through them, you can't unsee. But rewind further. Long before any ship existed to cross that ocean, in a desert basin in what's now the American West, researchers pulled seeds from a wild tobacco relative out of a fire pit roughly 12,000 years old, not scattered by accident, but concentrated in a way that only makes sense as intention. No pipes existed yet. No pottery. This predates the tools we normally associate with smoking by thousands of years, which means the behavior came first. The technology caught up later. And that forces a bigger question than, when did tobacco use begin? If people on one continent were deliberately burning a mind-altering plant 12,000 years ago, with zero contact with anyone doing the same thing an ocean away, what does that tell you about the impulse itself? It tells you it isn't cultural. It's older than culture. It's something closer to a shared inheritance. The elephants already knew. There's a name for this idea in anthropology, bold enough that it sounds almost implausible, until you look at who's actually arguing it. The proposal, the drive to alter one's own consciousness, sits alongside hunger and thirst as a basic biological pressure, not a corruption of instinct, an instinct in its own right. And the evidence doesn't stop at humans. Elephants go out of their way to eat fruit that's fermented well past nutrition and straight into intoxication. Certain reindeer herds actively seek out a specific hallucinogenic mushroom, and when the mushrooms run low, they've been documented drinking the urine of other reindeer who ate them first, because the active compound survives the trip through a body largely intact. An entire species, passing an altered state hand to hand, hoof to hoof, through the snow, for no nutritional reason at all. If animals with no language, no ritual, no concept of getting high as a cultural idea are still chasing altered states, then maybe we've had the causality backward this whole time. Maybe humans didn't invent the desire and then go hunting for ways to satisfy it. Maybe the desire was already running in the background of every mammal brain on the planet, and humans were simply the first species clever enough to systematize the satisfying of it. That reframes everything. This was never really about tobacco, or cannabis, or any single plant. Those were just whichever key happened to be lying around in whichever forest a given population called home. If your idea of why humans do what they do just quietly got rearranged, good. That's the halfway point. It gets stranger from here. Drop a comment with the moment that got you so far, and stick around, because the next part is the one people usually don't see coming. The medicine nobody talks about. Here's the part of this story that gets skipped almost entirely, and it might surprise you most. Smoke is medicine, not indulgence. One of the oldest surviving medical texts in human history, Egyptian, roughly 3,500 years old, describes inhaling heated herbal smoke specifically to treat the throat and lungs, which sounds backward to modern ears. You treat a lung problem with more smoke in the lungs? It's less broken than it sounds. If a plant carries a compound with real pharmacological effect, and you deliver that compound directly into the exact airway that needs treating, you've built a fast, direct delivery system, centuries before anyone had a word for pharmacology. The Greeks were doing something similar. So were physicians in ancient India, laying out precise herbal smoke protocols in medical texts over 3,000 years old. Specific plants matched to specific conditions. Civilizations with no contact with one another. The same idea arrived at independently again and again. Smoke is a vehicle, not just an experience. We never really abandoned that logic. We just changed the equipment. An asthma inhaler is that same ancient idea, wearing modern plastic. The circle was infrastructure. And then there's a piece of this story with nothing to do with chemistry at all. Groups of early humans who could trust each other instantly, coordinate without hesitation, move as a single organism under threat. They had a survival edge that isolated individuals simply didn't have. And it turns out that sharing an altered state together, a ritual, a rhythm, the world tilting slightly sideways at the exact same moment for everyone in the circle, is one of the most efficient trust-building mechanisms a social species can stumble onto. Neuroscience has since confirmed what those ancient circles seemed to already know without knowing it. Synchronized ritual experience measurably deepens trust between the people who share it. So the smoke circle wasn't recreation. It was infrastructure. A tool for welding strangers into something that could act like family exactly when it mattered, when a hunt turned dangerous, when a rival group came too close, when survival demanded a level of coordinated trust that plain conversation couldn't build fast enough. Where reverence curdles. This is the part of the story that's hardest to sit with, because it's where reverence quietly turns into something else. For thousands of years, across dozens of cultures that never touched one another, this behavior stayed disciplined, controlled, wrapped in ritual, treated as sacred, reserved for specific moments rather than every idle hour of every day. A shaman working with smoke was operating inside a framework of respect that took centuries to build. Then, in the span of a few hundred years, all of it got stripped away. A sacred plant crossed an ocean, and within a handful of generations, it went from ceremonial rarity to mass-produced, chemically engineered, deliberately optimized product, refined specifically to bypass the very restraint that had defined its use for millennia. The people who built that industry knew, internally, exactly what they were selling. They sold it anyway. Two people can hold the exact same burning leaf in their hand, thousands of years apart, and be doing almost nothing alike. One is opening a door their ancestors treated with awe. The other is running a business model built on making sure that door never closes. The floor keeps dropping. So, why did ancient humans start smoking? The honest answer: we can't pin it to a date, a place, or a single ancestor who figured it out. The physical proof reaches back roughly 12,000 years with real confidence. But the behavioral logic underneath it, the pull toward altering one's own mind, toward sharing that alteration with the group, toward using smoke as a bridge to the body, the community, or the divine, is almost certainly far older than any artifact will ever pull out of the ground. It may be as old as the first controlled flame. It may be as old as the specific kind of intelligence that lets a creature notice cause and effect and think, "That felt different last time. Let's find out why." That's not a flaw wired into our species. That's curiosity, running on the oldest hardware we have. And maybe that's the real reason this story refuses to stay buried. Every time archaeologists think they've found the earliest evidence, an older fire pit turns up somewhere else. The same telltale residue, the same deliberate placement, the same unmistakable signature of intention. The floor keeps dropping. So the next time smoke drifts past you, a bonfire, a kitchen, a candle just blown out, you're not smelling a modern habit. You're smelling something that outlived empires, outlived languages, outlived every civilization you were ever taught about in school. You're breathing something your ancestors were already choosing, long before they had a word for choice. We started this story asking why ancient humans began smoking. We're ending it with a bigger question: what other modern habits are actually ancient instincts wearing new clothes? Drop your guess in the comments, and subscribe, because we're about to go find out.